So, as I've been mentioning I was going to do, I went ahead and saw the new version of Beauty and the Beast earlier today, which was brought to us by Bill Condon, who I think got more mainstream attention when he did Dreamgirls, and obviously he did the last two Twilight movies as well, but I mean, let's not forget that he also, not only did he do Gods and Monsters, he won an Oscar for writing Gods and Monsters, so this is kind of an Ian McKellen reunion with him as well. So it seemed kind of, honestly, I guess going into this, he seemed like a bit maybe too obvious of a choice. Combining his musical movies like Dreamgirls with the kind of, I guess, teen girl demographic of the Twilight movies, at least for what this particular one seems to be more targeted towards. And we're kind of, we're in a dangerous territory with these Disney remakes, because only ever so often do we get one that turns out as good as The Jungle Book, in my particular opinion. So I felt like hopes were very low because I was thinking we were probably gonna maybe get somewhere in between Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland and Snow White and the Huntsman. That's kind of where my mind was at. While also kind of being, like, something that seems to be a popular thing to do when you're remaking these movies is to turn them into a fantastical costume drama, which is what I basically thought most of this movie was going to be. And, well, and I was a little scared there at first, too, because the start of the movie, of course, is, I believe I haven't seen the 91 animated movie since they re-released it in January 2012, so my memories are slightly vague, but I do remember it kind of, we already kind of know what's established, I believe, whereas at the beginning of this one we're actually getting the backstory, we actually get the full scene of when he was turned into the Beast by the Enchantress. And thank Christ it's not Cara Delevingne, but that's another story. So, as soon as I saw this, my first worry was, we have an hour and 25-minute animated movie that we're going to remake into a 2-hour and 10-minute live-action movie. Where is that other 45 minutes gonna come from? And sure enough, it begins, and yeah, it looks like any other costume drama. It looks like we walked into some concoction, somewhere in the middle between Pride and Prejudice and Atonement and stuff like that. There are a billion, but those are the first two that come to mind, that are recognizable instantly. But once it kind of starts off, after we get past that, we do go into our first musical number. And that's when we kind of realize that when they're not adding new scenes, they're basically recreating them exactly, as to the best of my knowledge. In this first opening with Belle, it just seems like it's almost frame by frame, at least what it feels like. And another thing that kind of comes into this is that I was worried about the thing that immediately turned me off of this movie when I first heard about it. Obviously, I have a differing opinion now, but at the start of it, the casting of Emma Watson as Belle just felt very, honestly, lazy is the word that comes to mind. Like, it's just something really easy to kind of get your audience, as opposed to going for who might be best for the part. It's because she's a recognizable face that this demographic loves. Instant success. I don't know. It's also, her presence is also worth noting that, the co-writer on this was Stephen Chbosky, the original writer and director of the movie for Perks of Being a Wallflower. So, I suppose one probably had to do with the other in one way or another, but I was just very concerned because Emma Watson doesn't do a whole lot for me as an actress. Like, there are moments in Perks of Being a Wallflower, there are moments in, like, Deathly Hallows 1, but, I mean, for the most part, it just seemed like a very boring choice, and I figured she would not bring anything particularly interesting to the role. And she's, I don't know, in regards to, like, presence, I guess she kind of exudes that in a way. But I do think there were probably stronger actresses they could have gone with, and there was also the singing aspect as well, where it's I mean, obviously, you know, musicals are typically pre-recorded, and there's obviously an audio and a visual going on that were done in two different places, and they just have to line up and make everything look fantastical as one whole. I don't know. As soon as Belle came out and began singing, there was a very clear distance, to me anyway, between what we were seeing Emma Watson do and what Emma Watson was doing on the audio. Like, whether there would have been enhancement or just something in general, the two things felt very disconnected. But that kind of, as the movie goes on, you kind of warm up to it a little bit. If you were in a place like me, you would warm up to it. And then we have, as far as visuals go, yeah, this is probably, once again, we're still early in the year, but these movies do have a very good track record of this. We're probably looking at potential costume and production design Oscar nominations in a year or so's time. And they do, the thing here is, this is getting, obviously, all the comparisons go to the 1991 animated movie. As far as telling the Beauty and the Beast story visually, something you'll really, really want to look into if you haven't is the 1946 French version. And it's very, I know that sounds, you know, always go for the old French movie or whatever, but as far as visuals, that movie is unmatched, not just in tellings of Beauty and the Beast, but movies in general. You just kind of have to see it to believe it. It's insane, and it is, so, as far as, but still, you know, capturing it visually, it did it nicely. There are some times where you kind of, obviously in this era of CGI, there's gonna be stuff that feels, you know, a bit artificial, especially when we get into, like, really big landscapes, to the point that, I suppose it's to their credit if sometimes you can't always tell, but, still, it's kind of a problem when you can't always tell if you're looking at something real or fake. And it can kind of take away from the kind of lush factor it might otherwise have when you're kind of trying to, you can't help but debate with yourself, you know, is this a real landscape, or am I just looking at a bunch of animated imagery? And one thing that really stands out there that also really makes you kind of question what the point is at the same time while praising it is the way they've done the Be Our Guest scene now. Which of course is an amazing scene in this movie and the original as well, the 91 one as well. The only problem, though, is that it gets really, really big to the point that after a while it's like all CGI. And that's when you kind of realize this is supposed to be the transition. You could say this about the Jungle Book as well, which of course I praised, but somewhere, if the movie is not up to the full quality or its full potential, you're going to find yourself asking, well, if the whole point was to bring Beauty and the Beast into a live-action world, are we really leaving the animation behind when a lot of the big scenes still are? It's just computer animation instead of hand-drawn? I guess that's really up for you to debate, but as far as that scene goes, when it's really well executed, like it was in this particular scene, I think it's easily forgivable. Especially when you look at the likes of Lumiere and Cogsworth. I was really wondering how they were going to do all of the talking inanimate objects in a live-action remake of this movie, but there's some really incredible stuff here. Lumiere in particular is just really well designed. And I love the way he's actually kind of, obviously, in the animated movie, he can, you know, move his arms and all that, and he kind of, the candelabra kind of makes a body for him, but in this, he actually just looks like he has, like, a golden body. And he basically is just a person that just happens to have, like, a little metal person that just happens to have flames coming out of 3 places. But it still looks really good. And they don't even particularly look animated. They look like they're actually there. And I think that's a huge step up for if you must go really CGI, which of course you were going to have to do with making inanimate objects come to life. To make it look like they're really there is what you need to do, and they definitely pulled that off with most of them, regardless of how outlandish or fantastical they got. And while we're also on the subject of CGI, I had heard a lot of complaints, and I was a bit concerned about Beast's appearance. Because obviously when you think live-action remake, your first thought is maybe they should go practical and actually kind of put him in like really elaborate makeup and make him look like an actual beast come to life. But then you look at him in the movie and he's got a very kind of CGI animated face going on here. Everything else around him looks great, but then you get to his face and then it's just like all animation. And at first that was kind of off-putting, and it was like, wow, they really probably should have gone practical with this. But then as the movie goes on, and Beast kind of starts to change his ways a little bit, and he has to use his face, like you can see in his expressions that he's kind of changing and becoming happier, more or less. That's pretty important, and probably not something that could have been accomplished if he was buried in makeup, unless it's like, you know, Jim Carrey doing The Grinch, which Dan Stevens is pretty decent here, but I don't think that, yeah, it's not exactly the same abilities. So in the long run, I think it actually was the smart play to be able to find a way to make sure his face is a lot more mobile. So, and that was probably the best they could have done. So I'm fine with all that. And then there is there's also the presence of Emma Thompson as Mrs. Potts is fantastic casting. And I heard Angela Lansbury was like really pissed off that they were making this or something, which I guess isn't too surprising. The older actors typically are, and she almost, yeah, there are times where it kind of sounds like Emma Thompson is great by herself, obviously. But for most of the movie, it does kind of sound like she's just doing kind of a Lansbury impression, especially when she sings the song. But with something as iconic as singing Beauty and the Beast while Belle and Beast are dancing, honestly, it probably was the better call to just, you know what, let's not even try to change this. Let's just kind of sound somewhat like Angela Lansbury and just go with it. Because obviously there is a new version of the song, and it went about as well as the updated versions of these songs typically go, which is... it would have been better if you didn't. But as far as the one that's in the movie that Emma Thompson does, that's great. That's perfectly fine. We also have Stanley Tucci in there as the piano, or whatever he is. He's a piano of sorts. And there's also Kevin Kline as Maurice, and I was a little concerned that he was going to be wasted, because for some reason... Kevin Kline is like a natural-born performer, and he can be like the biggest dude in the room and the funniest dude in the room. He won his Oscar for a big, giant comedy performance in A Fish Called Wanda. And lately, every time he shows up in a movie, it's like for 5 minutes and he doesn't do anything. And it's like, why? Why did you hire him and then never use him? This is probably the most put to use he's been in a movie for a while, and I was really pleased to see that. And how he kind of... what he adds to the movie kind of makes his and Belle's relationship a lot more potent, probably than we've seen it before, and it really kind of brings the emotion of, you know, her taking his place and them being separated and him being, you know, left for dead by Gaston and stuff like that. It's all stuff that's elevated by the kind of the warm presence he's able to bring to it here. Just that very first time we see him when he's just sitting in the room by himself and singing is just so beautiful, and then it just goes from there. So I'm really glad we kind of got to add on to that a little bit. And then there's the whole LeFou thing with Josh Gad, who's the perfect casting choice, by the way. I initially wasn't a fan of Josh Gad for a while there, because the only thing I knew him from was a very short-lived show that he starred in and co-created called 1600 Penn. It's like one of the worst things I've ever seen. Don't even Google it. But ever since Frozen, he's kind of really grown on me. and has become a presence that I kind of seek out in movies whenever he shows up now. And I do really like what he has to do here, and obviously there's the whole controversy thing about LeFou is supposedly the first openly gay Disney character. I'm not sure where all that publicity was coming from, apart from the fact that like Alabama and Malaysia were banning the movie or whatever. But or Malaysia just wanted to censor it, and Disney said "fuck you" and just took it away. But but good for them for that. But the thing here is that that's not even really the case. LeFou seems still quite in the closet, and they use it for comedy most of the time, and it's really barely there. Like honestly, if I didn't know any better, I probably wouldn't have thought a whole lot of it, except in maybe a couple of really quick instances. Because really, even if he is playing him as like openly gay anyway, the character didn't really seem that much different than he normally does. It's also the funny factor that I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I'm almost positive that it's actually Luke Evans who plays Gaston that is gay in real life, whereas Josh Gad is straight. So seeing this kind of switched over and it being LeFou that's in love with Gaston is kind of funny in that retrospect. And Luke Evans is fantastic in this. Like, at first, when I saw him cast as Gaston, I hadn't really... Like, the only thing I'd seen him in was, like, The Raven and Fast and Furious 6. And I think he was in either The Rings or The Hobbit movies. Might have been The Hobbit movies. I didn't really have a firm grasp on him. So when he was cast as Gaston, I was like, well, that's kind of... He doesn't really seem animated enough. No, Luke Evans is definitely animated enough to play Gaston. And he does it very well. And there are some cases where I was talking about this could potentially be costume and production design Oscar nominations, like, already in the mix. But there are some times where kind of trying to bring it out of animation and put it in real life, there's going to be some stuff that doesn't quite make the transition as well, and a lot of this has to do with sets. Like in the animated movie, one of my favorite scenes in the animated movie was always Beast's library. That was always one of those coveted movie places that never existed in real life, that you're like, that's like one of the fictional places I would love to be in. And then, obviously, the ballroom. But when you kind of see... The ballroom in the opening scene, yeah, I can kind of see, but when it's actually... the big scene takes place in it, you can kind of tell it's just like, I understand you're bringing it into real life, but there's definitely kind of a loss in magic when you look back on how the animated movie portrayed them and what they kind of look like in real life. Where it's supposed to be like super magical when we see them too. And it's just kind of, it just doesn't quite hit when we've seen it the other way, and it didn't carry over as strongly. And then, of course, we eventually get to the end, and then it kind of, after it had, like, really won me over, it kind of started to lose me a little bit here in this climax, because the climax does get, I mean, once again, it's pretty much exactly like the animated movie, but that's the problem, is they seem to keep forgetting they're making a live-action movie. So the climax here is very, very cartoon-like and very, very silly, despite the dark place it's about to go. Like, it's like every time I watch a rendition, whether this or the animated movie, no matter how many times I've seen the other movie, all I can think every time is, you know, I keep forgetting exactly how we get to the point to where this movie gets so dark and Gaston gets so bad that he ends up plunging to his death for a happy ending. I know that's the Disney way and everything, but it's just like, I don't. He just seems very narcissistic, but potentially harmless. And then he's always kind of a last-minute turn where it's like, oh no, this guy's actually insane. And this movie does not change that. 1 minute he's, you know, Gaston as we know him, he's, you know, wanting Belle to marry him, and he's, you know, talking to himself in the mirror and loving himself. And then suddenly he's tying, you know, Maurice to trees, hoping the wolves will eat him. and then he shows up. It's like the end of Edward Scissorhands with Anthony Michael Hall. He just shows up, and he's got a gun now, and suddenly he's a killer. Just out of nowhere. And the same fate happens. It's really... I only just realized how much Edward Scissorhands has in common with Beauty and the Beast just now. That's weird. But anyway, but yeah, and as far as, like, I do think it's funny that everybody's kind of building up this gay thing and how Disney put this in a movie geared towards children or whatever. The kid, a couple of seats over from me, was screaming and crying, terrified of, I believe, Gaston, actually, because it was the ending, where that big fight is breaking out. And this kid was losing his mind and screaming at his mom how scared he was. There's really nothing bad about it. He's just shooting at the beast. But he, you know, it's really nothing that wasn't in the other movie, if I recall. So, yes. But so the thing is here is that I actually did really like this. I'm not totally sure if that's only because my expectations were so low, because I was really not looking forward to this practically in any way. But yeah, it actually turned out really well. Like, most of the performances are really good. It is basically just a big recreation of the animated movie with a couple of new songs here and there and a couple of things thrown in there. The singing voices are top-notch with the likes of Emma Thompson and Ewan McGregor. I mean, like, come on. we're definitely getting the highest quality here. Beast has a new song that's really big and really good, even if it reminded me maybe just a tiny bit of Satan's song in the South Park movie. I was just getting that vibe just a little bit from it, just a tiny bit. I don't know if it was the context or what, but or just a big scary dude with this, you know, belting out this number or whatever. But anyway, so yes, surprisingly, I did like this a lot. I probably would have chosen another lead actress, but Emma Watson is fine. Like I said, as far as, like, you know, just a presence in general, she exudes it well enough. So yeah, you won't. There will be no surprises here. So if you think you're gonna like it, there's a very good chance that's going to happen, especially if you're a fan of the animated movie. Alright, so I guess we're going to end this here. I guess I'm going to... Oh my Jesus. This... yeah, obviously next week is like Power Rangers. I guess we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I will do that, but I mean, it's kind of like, oh, I'm gonna dread it, and then I was saying the same thing about Beauty and the Beast, I'm so dreading it, and then it actually ends up being good. I could give Power Rangers the benefit of the doubt because this happened, but I don't know, so we'll see what happens. I don't know. And as usual, you know, there'll be, I just did the Rock and Con Air thing, and sometime Friday I will do another one of those, whatever that is, and then we'll go from there. So in the meantime, I think that's it.